Hello and welcome everybody to the Barebones Fishing YouTube channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. Hope you are all doing well. What I wanted to do today was show you two of my favorite knots that I'll use. The first one being the Palomar knot, the second one I believe it's called a double Pitzen. And so I'm going to show you how I tie these knots and when I use one versus the other. Okay, so let's start off with the Palomar knot here. So I use the Palomar knot when I'm using either monofilament line or braided line, and I'll use this knot if I'm tying directly to a lure or to a swivel. We have our line here. So this is braided line. Like I said, I use this with braided and monofilament line. So I'm going to pass it through the eyelet of my jig, okay, and then I take the tag end and pass it back through the eyelet of my jig. So on the one side I have a loop, and then on this side I have a tag end and then my main line as well. And so at this point now what we're going to do is just a simple overhand knot with that loop, and make sure we go over both on this side over the tag end and the main line. Okay, and so now we have just your standard overhand knot here. Okay, so we're going to tighten everything up. So now what we do is we take this loop end and we're going to pass the lure or the swivel, okay, through that loop end. And now what we do is we simply cinch this down. Now a trick that I like to do is I will typically place my thumbnail right at the base of the eye of your swivel or your lure, and that kind of keeps the knot from slipping down the eyelet a little bit. So now what you're going to do is you're going to cinch it down with the main line and the tag end. You're eventually going to be pulling on the main line primarily, and I did not wet this. I figured I'd save you from that gross part, but obviously before I cinch it down I'd usually lubricate the line with a little saliva. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the tag end, cinch that down, grab the main line, cinch that down, and now I'm going to snip that. So there you have it, your Palomar knot snipped and ready to go. And like I said, so I use the Palomar knot if I'm using monofilament line or braided line. So the next knot I'm going to show you how to do is called the double Pitzen. And so it's going to start off very similar to the Palomar. So I pass the tag end through and then I pass it back through the eye. So what I end up with is a loop on the one side and then a tag end and a main line on the other side. Okay, so loop this around. Okay, so here's my loop, and then here's where I'm pinching it. Okay, and so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my loop and I'm going to wrap it around this loop coming from the lure here. So I'm going to wrap it around 4 times. So we're going to do 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now I've seen people do it more loops than that, but I generally use 4. And so now you'll notice that in my hand here, okay, so this is the hand that was holding the main line and the tag end. And so when I crossed over the initial loop, I pinched on here. Now I've got another loop in my hand, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this loop, okay, and pass it through here. Okay, and so this is where the knot gets created. And so now this is where I would moisten this, okay, add a little saliva, but for the purposes of this video, so now I'm just going to cinch it down a little bit, okay. And so now in this hand here I've got main and tag line, and then I've got a loop here, and then the knot, and then we've got another loop here on the lure. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the main line and the tag end, and this kind of cinches the knot down onto the lure, and then once the knot gets to the eye of the lure, I'm going to grab the loop and I'm going to pull on this a little bit, okay, to tighten the knot down, and then I'm going to then again pull on the main line and the tag end until this gets cinched all the way down onto the eye there. And there you have the double Pitzen. And so what you end up with now is you've got this loop, you have a main line, and then a tag end. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the loop and the tag end. So there's going to be 3 little pieces here that you end up with. Oops, there we go. And so there you have it. There is the double Pitzen knot. Like I said, this is my favorite knot to use when I'm using fluorocarbon. So one of the main issues that you might run into, especially if you're trying to tie this knot onto a swivel or a lure that's rather light, you'll have difficulty tying this knot. Usually it helps to have something that's quite heavy. And so if I'm tying this knot to a swivel, let's say for example, what I'll end up doing is I'll just take usually a weight, okay, or a jig or something like that. So now when I go to do my knot, okay, here we go. So now it's weighted down a little bit, and it makes it just a lot easier to tie this knot, versus if this jig is not there and I'm just using the weight of the swivel. When you go to try to do these loops in particular, it doesn't pinch this line down, okay, and it makes it quite difficult to tie. Okay, so there you have it, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. Hopefully you got something out of the video. Like I said, those are my 2 go-to knots. I use those for anything and everything. Those are really the only 2 that I use. Palomar if I'm tying anything with monofilament or braided line, and I use the double Pitzen if I'm tying anything with fluorocarbon. Hope you're all doing well. If you've made it this far in the video, please like and subscribe. It helps out a lot. Thank you very much for tuning in. Catch you on the next one.